Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 206, Professor Addison. Joseph Felix Holman Addison was born in 1866. This is based on his death certificate information. He died in Sydney in May 1928. He bequeathed his estate to a nurse Kerr and Ethel Celia Curtis, but there was a drama in the equity court surrounding his will in August 1929. His death certificate names his father as Felix. He actually has two death certificates, one under the name of Joseph F. Addison and one for Joseph F. Jacobson. Joseph Addison was in fact born Joseph Jacobson in Sandhurst, now known as Bendigo. He was the son of Thomas George Jacobson Thorber Johnson, known in Australia as Thomas Jacobson, and Emily Charlotte Addison, hence the origin of his adjusted name. His mother Emily was born in Westminster, England, and had a relationship with Thomas, having Joseph first in 1866, then Lavinia in 1873, then Emily Mary in 1876, Arthur Gunnell in Benalla in 1877, who died aged 9 months in Benalla, and Francis in 1879. Lavinia, Emily and Francis took on the surname Gons. And this was because Emily married John Frederick Gons in Sydney in 1884 when she was 40 and John 42. John had previously been married with 3 children. He arrived in Victoria with his wife Jane at the age of 31, with Jane being 26, and their children, Ernest 3 and Frederick 1, aboard the Carlisle Castle in 1873. Then Jane moved to New Zealand with their 3 children. Their youngest child was born in Victoria in 1874, in about 1878. 2 of Jane's siblings had emigrated to New Zealand. However, not long after she arrived in New Zealand, the 2 eldest children were placed into care, and Jane married again in New Zealand in 1879. Meanwhile, John had moved to Sydney in April 1884, and this is where he married Emily Addison in that same year. John and Emily had 3 children together in Queensland: Elizabeth Maud Gons on the 9th of March 1885, Edgar Albert Gons on the 14th of September 1886, and a son in 1888 or 1889. John Gons died in 1906 in Mossman, New South Wales, and his death notice reads, "At his residence in Yardie on Orlando Avenue in Mossman, John Frederick Gons, aged 63, late Government Printing Office, beloved husband of Emily and father of Francis and Lydia and Alfred and Mrs. W. Carl Glasser, who was Emily." Interestingly, his death notice names 3 children, Francis, Lydia and Alfred. These match none of the children listed above in his death notice. The children's father, Alfred Curtis, was listed as having a wine licence in 1890 in Oxford Street, Sydney. He's also recorded as being in Maitland Jail in New South Wales in 1896 when he was 47, and on the 12th of January 1898 in the Muswellbrook Chronicle, a man named Alfred John Curtis was remanded from Muswellbrook for 7 days under medical observation and was discharged at the East Maitland Police Court on the recommendation of Dr. Elkhorn. But it was around this time that he was committed for an unsound mind. So Alfred Curtis died after his lawful wife Jane on the 31st of August 1915 at Liverpool, aged 60. In his Liverpool State Hospital record, it stated he had been admitted on the 24th of May 1915, that he was born in Yorkshire, England, and had been in Australia for 45 years, so he emigrated in 1870 on the Tweed. His occupation was listed as a wool broker. His father was listed as Robert Cheeseman Curtis, and that was his son's middle name, and his mother Anna Maria Collins. He stated he'd married Jane Hanscom in Sydney when he was 34. The marriage record says that he was 25 and that he had not remarried. He listed his children as Ethel Sarah, 30 years old, but he had no information on her whereabouts, and Dawn Maria, 20 years old, who lived at 476 Crown Street, Surrey Hills. This was the address of Joseph and Jane, as she was known as Bertha Addison. So Alfred must have known that this is where his daughter had lived with Joseph and Bertha. There was another interesting memorial notice saying, "In sad but loving remembrance of our dear grandfather, George Addison, who departed this life on the 23rd of July, 1890, inserted by his loving grandchildren, Emily, Lavinia, Fanny, Lydia and Alfred Gons." Gone but not forgotten. So all of the children of Emily are listed, but not Joseph Addison. And there was a memorial notice for Emily's father, George Addison, "In sad but loving remembrance of our dear grandfather, George Addison, who departed this life on the 23rd of July, 1890, inserted by his loving grandchildren, Emily, Lavinia, Fanny, Lydia and Alfred Gons, gone but not forgotten." And interestingly, Joseph is not listed amongst those grandchildren. Jane was born on the 18th of August 1857 in Bega, New South Wales, and she was the 8th child of 11 to William Hanscombe, an English-born convict, and his second wife, Sarah Ann Francis. William originally had married Lydia Fordham in Melbourne, Cambridgeshire, England in April 1822, but William was convicted of housebreaking at the age of 21 and at the Cambridge Assizes was sentenced to death, which was commuted to transportation for life. He was not given a sentence on the second armed break and enter that he committed. His accomplices were also sentenced to transportation. In the Cambridge Chronicle on the 14th of June 1822, it announced that Edward Smith, William Hanscombe, Jonathan Ravella, James Fordham, William Collis, John Whitby and James Peters, all of Melbourne, on Thursday the 6th of June, were committed to the county jail to take their trials at the next assizes, charged with housebreaking, sheep stealing and other felonies. And on the 26th of July 1822 at the Cambridge Year Assizes, Edward Smith, 26, and William Hanscombe, 21, were indicted for a burglary in the house of James King of Melbourne and stealing thereout silver tablespoons, 4 teaspoons and other articles, and James Fordham, 24, indicted for receiving such articles knowing them to be stolen. On the 23rd of August 1822 in the Cambridge Chronicle, 11 convicts for transportation were removed from the castle in order to be conveyed on board the hulks at Portsmouth Harbour, and this included William Hanscombe. He departed England on the 22nd of April 1823 on the ocean and arrived in New South Wales on the 27th of August 1823. He was stationed with Mr. Rankin at Bathurst, New South Wales in 1825 and was still there in 1828. He married Sarah Francois in September 1838 in Richmond, New South Wales, when he was 36 and Sarah 19. Sarah had been born in Wicklow, Ireland, and arrived on the Duchess of Northumberland as an assisted immigrant in February 1835 when she was only 16. So Jane had actually married Alfred John Curtis on the 25th of December 1880 prior to being with Joseph Addison. They married in the Roman Catholic Presbytery in Victoria Street, Sydney, when she was 23 and Alfred 25. Alfred was English and they had 3 children. Their firstborn was Ethel Sarah Curtis, and she was one of the beneficiaries of Joseph Addison's will. She was born on the 15th of October 1881 in Surrey Hills. In the Sydney Catholic Press on the 8th of October 1914, an enjoyable gathering took place at Addison Hall, Crown Street, Thursday last, when Miss Nellie Addison celebrated her 20th birthday. 200 guests were present, among them a number of Miss Addison's school companions. Dancing interspersed by vocal selections made up the program, the music being supplied by an orchestra composed of Mr. Joseph Addison, LLCM piano. The hostess was the recipient of a number of handsome presents, among which was a beautiful Nellie Stewart gold bangle. Nellie died on the 16th of November 1939 at the Newington State Hospital in Lidcombe, New South Wales. She was only 38. The second-born child was William Cheeseman Curtis. He was born on the 20th of February 1884 in Paddington, but died on the 7th of March 1886 in Sydney, aged only 2. And then there was Nellie Dawn Maria Curtis, who was born on the 27th of September 1889 at Moore Park, New South Wales. She died on the 27th of August 1932 in Paddington, aged only 43. In the Sydney Morning Herald, It announces her probate on the 13th of October 1932. In the will of Nellie Dawn Maria Curtis, commonly known as Nellie Addison, late of Paddington, in the state of New South Wales, spinster, deceased, that her will be granted to Henry Joseph Walmold, the executor named in the said will. The children's father, Alfred Curtis, was listed as having a wine licence in 1890 in Oxford Street, Sydney. He was also recorded as being in Maitland Jail in New South Wales in 1896 when he was 47. In the Muswellbrook Chronicle on the 12th of January 1898, a man named Alfred John Curtis was remanded from Muswellbrook for 7 days under medical observation for an unsound mind, but was discharged at the East Maitland Police Court on Thursday on the recommendation of Dr. R. Elkhorn. Alfred Curtis died after Jane on the 31st of August 1915 at Liverpool, aged 60. In his Liverpool State Hospital record, it stated he'd been admitted on the 24th of May 1915, that he was born in Yorkshire, England, had been in Australia for 45 years, so emigrated in 1870, 10 years prior to his marriage to Jane, on the Tweed. His occupation was listed as a wool broker. His father was Robert Cheeseman Curtis, hence his son's middle name, and mother was Anna Maria Collins. He stated he'd married Jane Hanscom in Sydney when he was 34, the marriage record reflects he was 25, and that he had not remarried. He listed his children as Ethel Sarah, 30 years old, but had no information on her whereabouts, and Dawn Maria, aged 20, living at 476 Crown Street, Surrey Hills. Alfred must have had some contact with her and known that this is where she lived with his wife, who was living with Joseph Addison under the name of Bertha Addison. Meanwhile, Joseph Addison was living with a Mrs. Carmichael at Rose Street in Sydney in 1881 and was a theatrical supernumerary and a member of the chorus in theatres. After he left Rose Street, he went to reside at Surrey Hills, where he was known sometimes as Joseph Jacobson, sometimes as Signor Addisini, and sometimes as Professor Addison. On the 18th of December 1895 in the Sydney Evening News, Addison's third annual Pupils Concert. Temperance Hall, Pitt Street, Sydney. Professor Addison, basso profundo, will sing El Balin, Tempest of the Heart, also The Mighty Deep. Madam Addison, a contralto, will sing Love's Old Sweet Song and also The Long Avenue by request. And Nellie Addison, aged 6 years, was listed as a pupil. On the 15th of January 1898 in the Sydney Morning Herald, there was an advertisement, Addisini, Professor Singing, Voice Production, Italian, Laperti Method, Piano, 530 Crown Street. On the 4th of June 1898 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Addison, operatic baritone, Saintly's favourite pupil, singing, piano, violin. Madam Addison, oratorio contralto, pupil, Rosinati, singing, voice production, colleges visited, open engagements, 530 Crown Street. On the 22nd of December 1898 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Professor Addison's Pupils Concert. There was a large gathering in the Temperance Hall last evening when the pupils of Professor and Madam Addison, Saintly House, Crown Street, gave their 7th annual concert. The program was an unusually lengthy one, containing no less than 38 items, many of which were excellently rendered and reflected credit on the promoters. Madam Addison received a well-merited encore for her solo, Ora Pro Nobis, and her fine contralto voice was heard to advantage in her second number, He Was Despised, from the Messiah. Professor Addison sang with pleasing effect Nazareth, and as a piano solo contributed the march Hongros. On the 9th of December 1899 in the Catholic Press in Sydney, Royal Standard Theatre, Castlereagh Street, City, Addison's 8th annual Pupils Concert, vocal and instrumental, Professor and Madam Addison, teachers, singing, piano, violin, organ, Saintly Academy, 530 Crown Street, Surrey Hills. On the 13th of December 1899 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Stanley Academy. The annual concert of the pupils attending Professor and Madam Addison Stanley Academy was held last night in the Royal Standard Theatre. There was a large audience and nearly 60 pupils assisted. Professor and Madam Addison's contributions were warmly received, but owing to the length of the program, recalls were not allowed. All the pupils acquitted themselves creditably and to the entire appreciation of the audience. On the 3rd of April 1901 in the Sydney Morning Herald, organ recital and concert. Town Hall on this day. The program featured Mr. Joseph Addison performing the Toreador. 3 days later, the Sydney Morning Herald, Miss Emma Watts's concert. Miss Emma Watt, a new soprano, will give a concert at the Centenary Hall on Tuesday evening under distinguished patronage. Madam Addison and Mr. J. Addison will be amongst those who will assist. On the 9th of April 1901 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Centenary Hall, York Street, City, tonight. A grand concert will be given by Miss Emma Watt, soprano vocalist, pupil of Mr. J. Addison, Mr. Joseph Addison, performing Veccone la mia vendetta, though art passing hence. Madam Addison, contralto, song Will He Come. On the 10th of December 1902 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Oddfellows Temple in Elizabeth Street City, Signor and Madam Addison's 9th Annual Pupils Concert, vocal and instrumental. The 9th annual concert given by the pupils of Signor and Madam Addison were held in the Oddfellows Temple. The program presented was a long and varied one, including vocal, violin and piano numbers. Madam Addison was encored for her singing of Caro Mio Ben and responded with Tosti's Goodbye, and later on gave the Lost Chord. Signor Addison was also warmly applauded for his rendition of Save Vendicata Assai and the Toreador's song from Carmen. There was a large attendance of pupil and friends who seemed to thoroughly enjoy the efforts of the different performers. And on the 17th of January 1903 in the Sydney Freeman's Journal, at St Francis's Church, Haymarket, the Reverend Father Walsh, parish priest, on behalf of the choir, presented Signor Addison, conductor and choirmaster, with a silver-mounted baton as a token of esteem and appreciation of services of 5 years. Madam Addison, contralto soloist of the choir, received a gold cross. On the 7th of July 1903 in the Sydney Morning Herald, complimentary concert. The pupils of Professor and Madam Addison paid a graceful compliment to their instructors by tendering them a concert at the new Masonic Hall yesterday. The young people were rewarded for their efforts by a good attendance of their friends, who warmly applauded the musical and instrumental items rendered by the juveniles. The accompaniments were played by Professor Addison, who sang, in fine style, Beautiful Girl of Kildare. At the conclusion of the performance, a dance was held. And on the 5th of December 1903 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Signor Addison's pupil concert. The 11th annual concert of pupils of Signor and Madam Addison was held in the Oddfellows Temple last night and proved successful. A lengthy program of vocal and instrumental items was rendered by the pupils. Madam Addison, Signor Addison also contributed. And on the 16th of December 1905 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Mr. and Madame Addison's concert. Signor and Madame Addison gave their 13th annual pupils concert at the Oddfellows Temple last night before a considerable audience. Some 20 pupils joined in a formidable program of 31 numbers consisting of songs, violin and piano solos, choruses and orchestral pieces. A slight delay in dressing the platform at the beginning of the evening was energetically overcome by Signor Addison, whose baritone contributions and those of the contralto voice of Madam Addison were enthusiastically applauded. Tuneful and sweet were the Gleaner's Slumber and Will He Come, rendered by Madam Addison, while the Professor's voice was heard in fine effect with the aria La Mia Vendetta, also in the fine Toreador song from Carmen. And on the 6th of December 1906 in the Sydney Catholic Press, successful opera and concert. Signor Addison's opera company appeared in Offenbach's tuneful piece, The Rose of Orvine, at the Queen's Hall on Friday evening. There was a large and fashionable audience. Signor Addison, the well-known basso, held the stage as Pierre, his splendid voice ringing out its best notes in the introduced Toreador song from Carmen. He also got an encore for his contribution to the concert program, an aria, Vienna La Mia Vendetta. The accompanists included Nellie Addison. On the 27th of September 1908 in the Perth Sunday Times, under Signor Giuseppe Addison, musical conductor of St Benedict's, Jane died on the 1st of December 1909 under the name Bertha Jane Addison. However, her death notice is under the name Jane Curtis, and this is recorded on the 30th November 1909 in Surrey Hills. On the 16th of December 1909 in the Sydney Catholic Press, death of Madam Addison. Madam Bertha Addison, wife of Signor Joseph Addison, conductor of St Benedict's Choir, died at her residence, Saintly, at 476 Crown Street, Surrey Hills, on Wednesday after a month's illness during which she was attended by Reverend Father R. Collender. Heart failure was the cause of death. Madam Addison was 38 years of age and was married in London 20 years ago and came to Australia-Asia 2 years subsequently. She and her husband toured New Zealand, Tasmania and Victoria. Subsequently, they settled in Sydney. The late Madam Addison was a well-known musician and assisted her husband in the tuition of a large number of pupils. She was always ready to give her services to the church and charity and sang in many of the city and suburban choirs. For some time she was contralto soloist at St Francis's Church in Haymarket. The funeral was very largely attended, and at the grave at Waverley Cemetery, where Reverend Father J.L. Begley officiated, Adeste Fidelis was sung by a number of members of the Catholic choirs and professional singers. A great number of letters and telegrams expressing sympathy with the bereaved husband and daughter, Elaine, were received. What's interesting is that Bertha would have actually been 52 at the time of her death, certainly not 38. They didn't marry in London. In fact, they didn't marry at all by what we can gather. And there is no evidence of them touring New Zealand, Tasmania or Victoria before they settled in Sydney. There's a memoriam listed on the 1st of December 1910 in the Sydney Morning Herald. In loving memory of my beloved wife, Madam Bertha Jane Addison, contralto vocalist, and my dear mother who departed this life on the 1st of December 1909, inserted by her loving husband, Senior Joseph Addison, LLCM, conductor of music at St Benedict's, Sydney, and her loving daughter Nellie Addison and niece Celia Curtis. For all eternity in life and death we love but thee. And then on the 15th of January 1910, in the Sydney Morning Herald, Senior Addison, LLCM Professor of Music, Saintly House, 476 Crown Street, Sydney, and daughter Nellie Anderson, also Celia Curtis, niece, desire to tend their sincere thanks to Father Colander, St Peter's, Surrey Hills, and Dr Morgan Martin for kind services rendered by them to our late dear wife and mother, Bertha Addison, also to all kind friends for telegrams, wreaths, cards and letters received during our recent sad bereavement. And on the 2nd of December 1915 in the Sydney Catholic Press is another memorial in loving memory of my beloved wife, Madam Bertha Jane Addison, contralto vocalist, and my dear mother, inserted by her loving husband Joseph Addison JP, LLCM, Professor of Music, Addison Hall, Sydney, and her loving daughter Nellie Dawn Addison and niece Celia Curtis. A year after his wife's death, on the 29th of December 1910 in the Sydney Catholic Press, Senior Joseph Addison, the well-known master of singing and pianoforte, won the London College of Music's Commonwealth Medal for singing and is now entitled to the degree of licentiate of that college. It is some years since such a distinction was attained. Senior Addison, who studied under one of the famous masters in Milan, Italy, has a fine bass voice and has sung opera in England, New Zealand and Australia. Leaving the stage, he settled in Sydney and has since been connected with the Sacred Heart Church, Darlinghurst, St Francis's Haymarket and St Benedict's, George Street West as conductor. He is still conductor at St Benedict's. On the 16th of November 1911 in the Sydney Catholic Press, he advertises his services. Joseph Addison, LLCM Gold Medalist, conductor and bass soloist at St Benedict's, Sydney, professional singing, piano, violin and harmony, all exams at Saintly, 476 Crown Street, Sydney. On the 29th of February 1912, in the Sydney Catholic Press, Mr Joseph Addison's vocal recital. To celebrate the opening of his new studio at 57 Palings Buildings in Ash Street, Sydney, Mr Joseph Addison, LLCM, the conductor and bass soloist of St Benedict's Choir, gave an invitation vocal recital on Wednesday afternoon week. Mr Addison's fine bass voice was heard to advantage in pro percentus. Miss Nellie Addison was an accompanist. In 1913, Joseph is listed as living at 476 Crown Street, Surrey Hills, and his occupation is listed as a music teacher. And on the 5th of June 1913, in the Sydney Morning Herald, under the title of London College of Music. The town hall was crowded last night when the London College of Music held their 14th annual concert and distribution of prizes with the Minister for Education in the chair. Mr Joseph Addison sang baritone numbers. And on the 11th of January 1914 in the Sydney Sunday Times, concert at Bondi. The first series of concerts was given at Bondi on Sunday evening last under the direction of Mr E. Gilbert Howe. The vocalists included Mr Joseph Addison. And on the 3rd of December 1914 in the Sydney Catholic Press, Mr. Joseph Addison, LLCM, well known in Australian music circles, who has been for some time conducting the Sacred Heart Choir at Darlinghurst, has composed a new Ave Maria for 4 voices, which will be sung at the 11 o'clock Mass at the Sacred Heart Church on Sunday. The composition is in Mr. Addison's finest style and is a brilliant example in counterpoint, the melody being exquisitely devotional and sympathetic. On the 25th of November 1914 in the Sydney Cooperator, City Council selected Labor candidates. The following gentlemen have been selected to run in the forthcoming City Council elections as endorsed Labor candidates. Professor Joseph Addison for Cook. Joseph was elected as an alderman for the Cook ward from the 1st of December 1915, and he held that until the 30th of November 1918. However, on the 29th of December 1915, in the Melbourne Herald, there's a small article titled Full Court to Consider in Sydney. When the application by Richard Watkins Richards to oust Joseph Jacobson, sometimes called Giuseppe Addisoni, Benedetto Addisoni, and Joseph Addison, from his seat as an alderman of the City Council, was again before Justice Ferguson today, by consent an order was made for the matter to go to the full court. The Royal Nisi called upon Joseph Jacobson to show cause why he should not be ousted from the position of alderman of the City of Sydney. This was returnable yesterday. The respondent was allowed 14 days in which to file affidavits and the applicant a further 7 days to reply. The ballot papers, declarations and official roll were ordered to be produced in court on the hearing. The grounds on which the original order to show cause was granted were that irregularities had occurred with regard to the election and that the respondent was not duly nominated by his correct name. Another article titled What's in a Name? City Council Elections, Application for Ouster. The turmoil over recent elections to the City Council was extended today as the applicant Richard Watkins Richards alleged that there had been several irregularities in the conduct of the elections, among them 3 instances of alleged impersonation. William Robert Andrew Kerr of the firm Walker & Kerr, accountants, Bathurst Street, Sydney, stated in an affidavit that he had known the respondent Joseph Jacobson for over 10 years. The deponent was present when Jacobson was initiated into the United Service Lodge of New South Wales. On that occasion, Addison gave his name as Joseph Jacobson, and the deponent has ever since known him by that name. In another affidavit, Robert Crome of Laurie Parade, Balmoral Beach, musician, said he'd known Joseph Addison by sight for about 10 years, and for the last 5 years has known him personally. During that period, he had been known sometimes as Joseph Jacobson, which the deponent believed was his real name, sometimes as Giuseppe Addisoni, and sometimes as Benedetto Addisoni. During the last 5 years, he's been known as Giuseppe Addisoni and had called himself Signor Giuseppe Addison. Joseph Kelly, Paddington, a watchmaker, set out that the deponent had known Joseph Jacobson since 1881, sometimes known as Joseph Jacobson, sometimes as Signor Addisoni, and sometimes as Professor Addison. Nicholas Julius Gede of Randwick, in an affidavit, stated that Joseph Jacobson had been initiated into the Masonic Lodge United Service some years ago under that name. He was never known in the lodge under any other name. On the 3rd of March 1916 in the Bathurst National Advocate, the rule in Vernon's case was made absolute without costs, and in Jacobson's, the rule nisi was also by consent discharged with costs amounting to £30 to be paid to the respondent. The effect of the settlement is that Mr. Vernon is ousted and a further election will take place in his ward, but Mr. Jacobson retains his seat. On the 27th of April 1916 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, state elections, Gordon's seat. Alderman Joseph Addison of the City Council has signified his willingness to become a candidate for the selection in Labor interests for the Gordon seat now held by Mr. Wade. A meeting of the local Labor League will be held next Wednesday night for the purpose of arranging a date for closing nominations. Then on the 14th of February 1917 in the Bathurst National Advocate for state nominations for Surrey Hills, Joseph Addison. Despite his political aspirations, he's still heavily involved in music. On the 19th of March 1917 in the Sydney Morning Herald, National Concert. A large gathering assembled in the Town Hall in Sydney on Saturday night when a national concert was held, the program consisting of Irish pictures, songs and dances. Alderman Joseph Addison, who was in good voice, sang Who Fears to Speak of 98 and Off to Philadelphia and received an encore. On the 21st of August 1917 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, Alderman Joseph Addison of the City Council was presented last week with a gold-mounted umbrella by Alderman Buckley of Redfern on behalf of the rock choppers employed in the City Council in recognition of his efforts in securing increased wages for them. And on the 21st of August 1918 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Addison College of Music, Joseph Addison, JP, LLCM Gold Medalist, Professor of Singing, Piano and Violin, Addison Hall, Crown Street. On the 21st of November 1924 in the Sydney Morning Herald, City Elections, Flinders Ward, and Joseph is listed amongst the candidates for Labor, and it's got a little note underneath. Mr. Joseph Addison is an ex-alderman of the City Council. He's regarded as a strong Labor candidate on account of the big majority he secured in the Cook Ward in 1915 when he defeated the late Sir Richard W. Richards, who was the Lord Mayor. And on the 6th of April 1927 in the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate, the plate glass window of Joseph Addison's shop, Crown Street, Sydney, was smashed on Monday night, and a phonograph and a number of mouth organs were stolen. And the last entry I have of an advertisement for Joseph Addison's music company was on the 25th of January 1928 in the Sydney Morning Herald. Joseph Addison, JP, LLCM, Professor of Singing, Piano, Violin, Mandolin, Italian Language Taught, Addison Hall, Crown Street. Joseph Addison died at his Surrey Hills residence on the 21st of May 1928 at the age of 62, and he was buried in the Catholic section of the Waverley Cemetery. His funeral notice was placed in the paper on the 22nd of May 1928 in the Sydney Morning Herald. The relatives and friends of the late Joseph Addison, JP, ALCM, LLCM, are kindly invited to attend his funeral, leaving his late residence, 476 Crown Street, Surrey Hills, to the Catholic Cemetery, Waverley. The relatives and friends of Miss Nellie Addison are kindly invited to attend the funeral of her beloved father, Joseph. And on the 21st of June 1928, in the Sydney Catholic Press, there was an obituary placed for Mr. Joseph Addison. The death of Mr. Joseph Addison, which occurred at his residence in Crown Street, Surrey Hills recently, removes a figure well known in musical and theatrical circles in Sydney for many years. The late Mr. Addison was a native of England, coming to Australia in his early youth. He was an accomplished musician, holding several degrees of the various colleges of music. He also gained prominence as a singer, at one time winning the coveted gold medal as Champion Baritone of New South Wales, an award rarely given. For many years he was choirmaster at St Benedict's and at the Sacred Heart Darlinghurst. At the latter church he was a conductor and bass soloist for 9 years. The deceased also took a prominent part in politics and served a term as alderman in the City Municipal Council, representing the district in which he had lived for 31 years. In his younger days he actively engaged in the theatre profession and was connected with the firm of J.C. Williamson. During his last illness, he was attended by Reverend Father R. Collender, PP, from whom he had the consolation of receiving the last rites of the church. Prior to the funeral, which left deceased's late residents, Father Collender recited the prayers for the dead. He also officiated at the graveside. Those present at the interment, which took place at Waverley Cemetery, included Miss Nellie Addison, daughter, and Miss Ethel Curtis is listed as well. On the 10th of August 1928, in the Government Gazette of New South Wales, in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, probate jurisdiction. In the matter of the estate of Joseph Felix Holman Addison, late of Sydney, in the state of New South Wales, Professor of Music, deceased. Notice is hereby given that every creditor or other person having any debt or claim upon or affecting the estate of the above-named deceased, who died on the 21st of May 1928, and whose probate was on the 27th day of June 1928 granted by the Supreme Court of New South Wales to David Skeldon Murray, the sole executor named in the said will, is hereby required to send particulars in writing to the said David Skeldon Murray on or before the 13th day of October 1928, of which time David Skeldon Murray will proceed to convey and distribute the property and assets of the said deceased amongst the persons entitled to having claims. David Skeldon Murray was a bookbinder living in Sydney. There was a memoriam placed in the paper on the 21st of May 1929 in the Sydney Morning Herald, in sad but loving memory of my dear dad, Joseph Addison, who departed this life on the 21st of May 1928, rest in peace, inserted by his loving daughter, Nellie Dawn Addison. On the 22nd of August 1929 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, it's an article titled, "Did not know that they were sisters till yesterday. had always believed themselves cousins. Brought up in the same household, one knew her mother as aunt. Amazing story of Professor. An outstanding drama of mixed identities was unfolded before Justice Innes in the Equity Court yesterday when he dealt with claims on the estate of the late Professor Joseph Addison, well-known musician and ex-city councillor. Two sisters, middle-aged women, were opposed, yet neither, until the proceedings had been taken, ever knew that they were sisters. One, Ethel Celia Curtis, had known her mother only as aunt, and Addison she knew as uncle. The other, Nellie Dawn Maria Addison, had believed Addison to be her father and had always known her sister Ethel Curtis as her cousin. Nellie Dawn Maria Addison unsuccessfully applied to the court for a share in the estate of the late Joseph Felix Holman Addison. Addison was well known in public life both as a musician and a city councillor from 1917 to 1920. He died last year, bequeathing his estate of about £3,000 to a nurse Kerr and Ethel Celia Curtis. Miss Addison, a noted vocalist, said that she'd always lived with Professor Addison and his wife, her mother, assisting him in music teaching and in his election campaigns. Her mother died in 1909. The professor had never paid her for her services, but always said that he would leave her all his property when he died. At this stage, Mr. Mason, instructed by Rawlinson and Hamilton, produced the birth certificate of Nellie Dawn Maria Curtis, dated September the 27th, 1889. It showed that Nellie Dawn Addison was actually the daughter of Alfred John Curtis and his wife Jane Curtis, formerly Jane Hanscom. Thus, the woman in court received the first outstanding revelation that she was somebody else. The respondent submitted that Jane Curtis, formerly Hanscom, and Bertha Jane Addison, formerly Hanscom, were one and the same person. Mr. H.W. Moffat, instructed by Mr. Osborne Allen, countered by submitting the death certificate of Bertha Jane Addison showing she was 38 when she died. He then showed from the marriage certificate of Alfred John Curtis and Jane Curtis that Jane Curtis would have been 52 in 1909, thus Jane and Bertha Jane could not have been identical. Ethel Celia Curtis, daughter of Alfred John and Jane Curtis, in an affidavit stated that she had lived practically all her life with Professor and Mrs. Addison, to whom she referred to as uncle and aunt. At the instance of Addison, she had registered the death of her mother as that of her aunt. His Honour decided that the applicant was not the daughter of Addison, but the lawful daughter of the Curtises, and accordingly dismissed her application. His Honour decided that in view of the improper conduct and deception practised by Addison, costs should be paid out of the estate. But here the drama takes the strangest twist of all. Joseph Addison never really existed. Addison was an assumed name. His real name was Jacobson. And on the 26th of October 1929, in the Sydney Morning Herald, City of Sydney, Surrey Hills, in the deceased estate of Joseph Addison, 476 Crown Street. Shop of brick with slate and iron roof, tiled front and cantilever awning, with licensed hall behind, known as Addison's Hall, and with extensive storage basement beneath. Above the shop are 2 living rooms, and at the rear a flat roof. Water, sewer, gas and electric light are connected. The property is in a prominent position a few doors removed from Collins Street. So the court actually stated that these 2 girls of Jane, Nellie and Ethel, even though they were Joseph Addison's stepchildren, I suppose, even though it seems that Jane and Joseph never married, so it seems that in his initial will he bestowed the £5,000 between his nurse Kerr, and Ethel. So the judge ruled that Ethel could not claim any of the estate. Nellie only died 3 years after that court case, and Ethel died in 1939, so around about 10 years after this court case, and both did not marry. So a tangled web of alternative names, marriages that didn't happen, and it seems also with Jane that her age was well and truly reduced for her death certificate.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.